Good morning. I'm going to start chapter 5. Bibles for Russia. By 1973, my precious little daughter had somehow become a bright-eyed, attractive young lady, and several local young men were exhibiting some serious interest in her. Although she knew that any one of them would be proud and happy to be her husband, Virginia believed that the choice of a marriage partner was a decision only God could wisely make. I was proud to hear that she had committed the choice to him. The following year, Maria and I bought tickets to visit friends all around the country. Virginia was to go with us. The Sunday before our departure, the Lord gave her an exciting prophecy through a godly friend. Listen, young lady, you have said that you will let me choose you a husband and that you will not choose him for yourself. Now, on the trip that you are about to make, you will meet the man of my choice. At about that same time, a man in the church had a vision of a young, brown-haired man with a dimple on his right cheek. He saw that Virginia would meet him walking down a road, but would not know that he was the one God had chosen. 2 days before we were to leave, a Christian friend came to visit us. Virginia was not at home at the time, but the man persisted in telling us all about his nephew, who was an intelligent, good-looking, and very nice young man. He also invited us to stay in his house and visit his family while we were on our trip, and we agreed to do this. We caught the train at the Fega station and were walking toward Bijigi when we encountered a young man walking in our direction. When Virginia saw him, she whispered excitedly to Maria, "If I could find a boy like that, I would marry him." We went on to the home that was our destination. Soon after a warm greeting, we all sat down to eat. As we were enjoying a delicious meal, the host family's young nephew walked in through the door. It was Mike, the boy we had met on the road. Mike was the young man our friend had been telling us about during his visit to our home. When Virginia saw him and realized what she had said to her mother, she dropped her spoon. We stayed there in Bijegi a couple of days. Then we went on to another city. While we were gone, Mike's family declared a fast for 3 days. They wanted God to let them know if Virginia was to be his wife. If so, let the Dudumans come back to our house, they prayed together. In a short time, I was called to pray for a man in Deva who was gravely ill. He lived in a town close to Bijigi. To no one's surprise, while we were on our way, Virginia suddenly said, "Let's go back to Bijigi and visit these people again." We did so, but there was no discussion of marriage. We soon left for Timisoara. After a few days of ministry, we departed to Constanta. The people were excited to see us again. On Sunday, during the service, a brother leaned over to me and whispered, "You see that man behind you? He's a Secret Service man who has been following you since you left Timisoara." Soon I was called to preach, but knowing the Secret Service man was there for me, I was unable to speak. For 10 to 15 minutes, I just stood still. Everyone thought I was receiving a vision from God. Finally, I felt a power come over me. I cried out, "Hallelujah!" The power of God then fell on the entire church. A prophecy came forth. "You who came here with a burden for me to heal you, I will surely heal you today." A woman stood up and said she had cancer. She showed her stomach area, and we saw a cancerous infection eating clear through to the surface. She said, "See this? God is going to heal this." After prayer, she again showed the same area. It appeared as though there had never been any cancer. Before we had started praying, a non-Christian woman stood up and said, "I came here to be healed too. A man appeared in my hospital room this morning and told me to come here to be healed." This woman was on the verge of death, but when we prayed, God healed her also. She gave her life to God that morning. At the same time, a man possessed of the devil fell to the floor near the Secret Service man and began writhing and screaming. The Secret Service man stood up, covered his head with his hands, and cried out, "Please tell Mr. Duduman not to harm me. Tell him not to pull my hair out." He then turned and ran out the door and never returned. Though I could do nothing, I was thrilled that God was in charge of all. From there, we returned home. In just a few days, Virginia received a letter from Mike asking if he could come and visit, since he needed to call upon some Christians in our area. Yes, she told him. In March, he arrived. Just before he had left home, he had a dream that he and Virginia were to be married. He had asked the Lord to confirm the dream in church. God gave him a prophecy that very morning in our fellowship, telling him that the dream was indeed real. After the service, he walked Virginia home and told her about his dream and its confirmation. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said. Fathers are fathers, and Mike might not have been the man I would have chosen for my daughter, but Maria would have none of my objections. "Nobody told you who to marry, and this is none of your business. Keep still." The beautiful wedding was May the 5th of 1974. It wasn't long after the two were married that he became involved in the work we also fully shared. Mike has been a sharing, faithful member of our family ever since. Bibles, Bibles, Bibles. The matter of their delivery continued to be the focus of my thoughts. Nothing could be more dangerous. It was an immense risk every time we took part in a smuggling mission, but God protected us. We were stopped many times. The police would check our cars and find nothing, even though they were filled with Bibles. Fear would pound in our hearts, but our joy was equally intense as we watched God faithfully protect us. Both Open Doors and Door of Hope delivered Bibles near the border so it would be easier for us to get them. From there, they were brought to my house, and we were able to transport them across the Russian border. At first, it was very hard to make contacts inside Russia, so we began to fast and pray about how to make the right friends. One night we were sleeping soundly when suddenly someone shook me by the shoulder and woke me up. At first, I thought it was Maria, but she appeared to be asleep. Was she teasing me, pretending to be asleep? I raised one of her eyelids and said, "Maria, did you wake me up?" She was angry with me and said, "No, let me go back to sleep. Why did you wake me up?" "You had a dream that accused me of waking you up." I knelt down beside the bed and prayed. I returned to bed but was unable to sleep. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder and a voice said, "Wake up, Dumitru." This time I looked up and saw a man dressed in white, shiny clothes. "Do you want me to take the Bibles to Russia?" Yes, no, I'm sorry. "Do you want to take the Bibles to Russia?" "Yes," I quickly replied. He said, "Because you have asked, I came to help you." The man gave me an address in Ratutu, a city not far from the Russian border, located beside the railroad line that runs into Russia. He said, "I will go before you. When you get there, a man will ask what you want. Tell him I am sent by the same person who just visited you." And I got up, dressed, and went out. When I arrived in the city, I knocked on the door. A man opened the door, trembling with fright. "What do you want?" he asked. "I am sent by the same person who just visited you," I said. "I want to send Bibles into Russia, and I want you to help me." Trembling even more, the man invited me in. Soon he explained to me what we could do to get the Bibles across the border. He pointed to a key hanging on the wall by the door. "Take it, bring the Bibles, and store them in my basement. Then, here's what we'll do." He went on to describe his plan. When a boxcar load of furniture would come into the station, he would pull it off the line, saying the car had to be checked and the wheels adjusted for the Russian tracks, which differ in width from the tracks in Romania. The car would then be unloaded and the furniture stored. While the furniture was in storage, with the help of several other men, some of whom would stand guard, we would take the Bibles from the basement and put them in the furniture, which would then be loaded back into the boxcars. When the car was put back on the railroad line, it was on its way to Russia with no problem whatsoever. Across the border, it would be unloaded, and a brother named Konstantinik would distribute the Bibles. One blessing quickly became evident. When it came to smuggling Bibles into Russia, No difference was ever made with regard to the various denominations who wanted them. We gave to all of them with joy. Some nights we took Bibles to Dornesty to store them in a basement, where they would be transferred to train for shipment to Russia. When a load of furniture would come through about every 2 weeks, the car would be pulled off the main line and we would pass another load of Bibles into Russia. Other nights we took them to Stinka, where they would be delivered to Russia by car or on foot. Many times, when I would take Bibles from my home to store them, I would return to find the police checking my house. Even though they could find nothing, they would still take me to the police station and keep me in jail for a day or two. There they made great sport of punishing me. My hand would be shoved into the door hinge, and the door slammed against my fingers. My face would be slapped and spit upon as they tried to force me to tell them who was helping me take Bibles across the Russian border. In spite of all this, God helped me not to reveal anything. I felt I would rather die than betray my Christian brothers. One example of the harassment was when my grandfather died. He was 115 years old and was the only Christian in his village. The communists detained me and put me in jail so I could not attend his funeral. I cried and was angry, but nothing changed their minds. Meanwhile, the volume of work was growing steadily. Soon it was so much we couldn't fit all the Bibles into our little cars. To our amazement, we had to start using trucks and trailers. I was contacted by more missionaries and missions with Bibles to donate. I always prayed and fasted, asking God whether to go or not to go. I wanted to work in His power and not in my own. I believe it was because of this commitment that not one Bible got lost or fell into the hands of the police or secret police. The life of worry caused me to stay close to God, and He protected me with His strong hand. Even when we were being followed by the police, we never stopped getting together for prayer. At one time, there had been many Bibles among the church people, but the communist government did not allow them to keep the Bibles, so they confiscated them all. I was surprised one morning when I woke up to find a whole truckload of the confiscated Bibles dumped in my front yard. I told Maria, we can't just leave them here. So we picked them all up carefully, checking each one for the name of the owner. We put them away out of sight, and then I went on my bike or walked to return each book to its owner. I did this without anyone knowing. Sometimes I put them in the mailbox or left them on the doorstep so they would find them in the morning. It took me many nights to complete this project. One day I received notice that I was to report to the police at Dorohoi. I was gripped with fear and went to the house of a Christian friend for prayer. The Holy Spirit came and spoke through him. Listen, I have been with you always and have protected you every time. I will be with you this time also and will save you. Don't be afraid. I will not let you down. I went back home and got dressed. With tears in my eyes, I said goodbye. I was very emotional because I knew all too well what this meant. I had been through similar encounters many times before. I took a bus from Hintensi, traveling 2 hours to Todohori. I prayed every mile of the way. I kept asking myself what they would do to me. I received no answer. I went straight into the police station and the officer in charge began interrogating me, promising me if I would answer him, everything would be much easier on me. After a little while, he saw he was getting nowhere, so he left. Soon his superior, a colonel, entered the room. He was an ugly, gangly man with a mustache. He glared at me and began cursing God's name. Tell me, he snarled, how can you afford to feed all of those Christians and nearly half a church in your house? I feed my brothers with God's help. Well, what did you do with the Bibles that we left in your yard? Did you put them in with the others that you have stored up? God knows, I don't. When he heard my words, he started cursing at me, saying, God again, I will get these God business out of your head once and for all. I'll show you. He put his face right by mine, as close as he could get it, and he whispered hoarsely and angry, Come on, tell me, how many missionaries are you dealing with? Seeing that I would not respond, he called in a superior officer who spat out the words, "Come with me. You will tell me everything. You'll even answer questions I don't even ask." Guards roughly shoved me into a filthy jail cell. It was pitch dark. They slammed the door and left me there. For some time it was quiet. Then I heard another door open and close, but I saw nothing. Then I began to hear strange noises. Suddenly I felt something crawling up my legs. I grabbed at them, throwing them off. Rats! I continued grabbing frantically at them, trying to throw them to the floor. They began to jump up on my back, my head, all over me. I cried out to God, "God, are you going to let me die like this?" I didn't have time to finish my prayer when a bright light came into the room and a voice commanded me, "Dumitru, look at me." I raised my eyes, but the light was so bright I couldn't look. He was clothed so brightly it blinded me. At the waist he had a shining belt. He had a huge flaming sword in his hand. Again he said, "Look at me. I am Gabriel, the commander of God's army. God has heard your prayers." He went on to say, "I will put fear in the hearts of those who hate you. I will also cause them to set you free. Now, close your eyes." I closed my eyes, and after a few seconds he said, "Open your eyes and look down." When I looked down, all the rats were dead. Gradually the light dimmed, and finally the angel was gone. After a long time, the silence made the guards curious. Suddenly the door burst open. The colonel looked in, and when he saw all the dead rodents, he began to scream, "You have killed all my children! Get out of here! Go home! All my children are dead!" He struck me in the head with his baton, had me beaten, and sent me home. Soon we were back at work delivering the Bibles. We fasted and prayed, and God sent more Bibles. He also closed the eyes of those that inspected the cars so they could go through undetected. It was a tremendous risk each time we moved our precious cargo, but God unfailingly protected us. Only true believers were chosen to take Bibles. We chose people who lived clean lives and served God continually. We all needed every bit of spiritual strength we could muster to help us face the hardships and constraints that might eventually occur. Many times in Romania, pastors are paid by the government to inform on the activities of the believers, even to the extent that 2 men came to my house saying that they were sick and wanted healing. They claimed they had heard about a sister who was healed after being bedridden for 4 years. One claimed to have had heart trouble, the other stomach trouble. I was at a loss for words for an instant. Then the Holy Spirit showed me they were government agents. I boldly told them, "You are not my brothers. You are not sick, nor do you believe in God. Why do you pretend to be someone you are not?" Upon seeing they were discovered, they took out their badges, arrested me, and took me to a drawer. There they interrogated me, laughed at me, spit on me, and told me if I didn't settle down and quit praying for sick people, they would put me in jail and I would never get out. I told them, "You decide if it is more important to listen to people or to God." The captain asked, "Isn't Dududa a pastor and brother with you? How is it that he listens to us and even keeps us informed with the latest news of Christians?" I answered, "He will answer to God for what he does." The colonel responded, "We'll see how you act to his face." He grabbed me and took me to another room where I could see Pastor Dududa through a glass. "What do you say we do with Duduman?" asked the colonel. Sentence him to prison. He came to my church and prayed for sick people a lot of times," was the response. A door opened and I was shoved into the room with Pastor Dududa. "Go shake hands with your brother, Dududa." "He is not my brother. If he were, he would not betray the Christians," the colonel said. "He hates you because God uses you in all the churches." I answered that I do not know what harm there is in praying for the sick and to have joy with your fellow brethren. I don't take any money from anyone, nor do I trick anyone. The colonel turned to Dududa. "Are you doing this and trying to put blame on those who are merely trying to keep their religion?" "I needed the money because I have a big family." The colonel began to slap and knock him around, saying he was a thief and traitor, until Dududa cried that he would tell him everything. The colonel then dismissed me, telling Pastor Dududa, the one who digs someone else's grave will himself fall into it. I later learned that they took Dududa's pastor's license from him, and about 2 months later he died. The God of Daniel still protects those who serve him. And still there were more Bibles and more missionaries that came from Germany, America, Holland. There were so many that the police were worried. They couldn't locate the source, nor could they keep up with the traffic of Bibles. There were simply too many Bibles. The harder they tried, the more God protected his people. We transported Bibles by train, bus, and trailers. Many of them were bound for Russia. One of our best systems was to work through the mines. Mine trucks traveled back and forth between Romania and Russia every day. Every time we sent Bibles, a member of my family would go and check to see that they made it safely, taking clothes and money for those in need. Usually, this went to the families of the ones who had been put in prison because of the Lord's work. One time, after we had sent a particularly large load of Bibles, I went personally to check that it had arrived at the given destination. I had a hard time getting a visa into Russia. Then, once I had finally crossed the border at Vadu Seret, I was called aside and questioned as to whether I had Bibles or religious books. First, I was interrogated and searched at the Romanian checkpoint, and then again at the Russian checkpoint. Fortunately, I passed through both safely, taking with me some rubles from the Russian brothers. What a joy it was to take part in religious services being held at Serenuta, Russia. They were meeting inside a tent beside a destroyed church which the communists had bulldozed down just a few days before. I thought to myself, nothing stops them from worshiping God, not rain, snow, or the police. But while we were praying, one of them suddenly whispered, "Let's go, the police are coming." Soon, 18 police cars and 4 fire trucks pulled up. The fire hoses began dousing the tent with forceful streams of water, while the police began beating everyone in sight, men, women, and children. It was a heartbreaking sight. My companion, Constantine, and I barely escaped to our hotel. And even in the relatively safety of that place, we were up all night reliving the terror that what we had seen. In the communist world, the police are often against the people. Discrimination is widespread, and no matter how much education a person has or what kind of work he does, if he does not belong to the Communist Party, he is not respected. He cannot get a job. He is unable to defend himself. Christian families are the neediest families of all. One gloomy February, one gloomy February night, I was taking Bibles across the border again. It was bitterly cold, and blizzard conditions made traveling nearly impossible. We couldn't use the back roads, so we had to travel the main highway where the police would be checking all suspicious vehicles. We covered about 25 kilometers without any problems. Then we realized that we were being followed. At that very moment, the angel of the Lord appeared to us and told us to turn right on a road that led into the forest. We didn't get far before our wheels were stuck in the snow. We couldn't move backwards or forwards. We were desperately afraid of being caught, so we got out and carefully hid the Bibles in the snow. Then we waited a few hours. It grew colder with every passing minute. The hours seemed endless, and we were almost frozen. "God," I cried out, "send someone to help us." The angel spoke to us again, saying, "Don't worry, I will send you help." With that, he vanished. Within moments, we heard the voices of the Border Patrol guards. "What are you doing here?" they asked. "We are not from this area. We're lost and snowbound." "Good work, guys. You'd better come with us to the post so you don't freeze to death. We'll come back in the morning to get your car out of the ditch." As we walked, my legs were so numb I couldn't feel them, but we were soon warming ourselves beside a fire and were able to rest comfortably at the post until morning. Then we accompanied the guards and their bulldozer back to our snowbound car. I held my breath as the vehicle was dislodged from its snowbank, hoping the Bibles would not be revealed. They were not. After staying with a friend in Helsinki for 2 days, we returned to get the Bibles. We searched everywhere for them, but every snow-covered mound looked like the next one. We began to pray together. A voice spoke to us, both of us. Look around where you see the light. Our eyes searched the snow, and all at once a little glimmering light flickered across the way. We rushed over and started digging where it shone. There were the Bibles. We frantically dug them out, loaded them into the car, and headed for the border. As we rode along, we heard a now familiar voice. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Those guarding tonight will be sleeping. They won't hear or see you. It was just as he promised. We made our way across the border, found some faithful Baptist brothers, and gave them the Bibles. Grateful, we returned home, praising God for the way he had given us the victory. Often we could cross the border where there was no checkpoint. I would turn around and walk backwards so that it would appear that someone came from Russia into Romania, and then when I returned, it would appear that they came back from Romania into Russia. By April 1980, we had sent a lot of Bibles into Russia. I decided to go see what was going on with the Christians who had received them. When I got to Cernuita, the first message I heard was that the Konstantinuk Christian men had been arrested and their families didn't have anything to eat. I couldn't get near them because they were heavily guarded, so I went back home wondering how could I help the families. I prayed to God to give the solution in the shortest time possible. I also shared the problem with my family. We decided that Virginia and Mike, along with some cousins, should go help these two families. God worked out the details, and soon my children were given passports and visas. Before they went, all of us fasted and prayed for God to protect them and guard the provisions they were taking with them. They arrived at the border where all Romanian visitors were held to be checked. Those who had too much in their packages would have to pass an inspection. There were 7 people ahead of them when the chief inspector approached Virginia. Bring your packages and come with me, he ordered gruffly. Whispers around them said, too bad, he's the worst one here. They'll be lucky to leave with anything in their hands. But when they got to his station, he told them to take their packages and go. He checked nothing. On the bus, more than half the passengers' packages had been taken away, but ours had been protected. Virginia and Mike didn't have an address for the families, but before their departure, God gave Virginia a dream. She saw herself meeting Sister Lydia in front of the hotel. We later learned that Sister Lydia had the same dream. At 7 a.m., the two women met, weeping with joy. Virginia and Mike returned home, joyfully reporting their successful journey. Later, we received a letter from Sister Lydia thanking us for our help. Life in the communist world is very hard, and the closer a person walks with God, the more difficult it becomes. After my children returned from Russia, the Lord opened a new way for me to transport Bibles from Romania all the way to Chisinau, Russia. Since I didn't know the person I was sending them to, I decided to go first and meet him. Chisinau is built on the banks of the river Dnistru. When I arrived at Chisinau, I realized that I was being followed by a Soviet policeman. Remembering God's protection, I was able to shake him off and make my way to some Christians. With them, a man named Visanov. After singing and praying for a time, the Lord spoke to me through him. He said, "You must come before me with fasting and prayer because you are going to go through a big trial and a mighty shaking. I am speaking to you before this happens, so in the day of testing, you will not be discouraged." After we had prayed, I heard a miraculous story of a group of Christians who had been in Siberia. They had been forcibly taken there with their families and left without food. They had only shotguns for hunting and tools with which to hew trees. The orders were, cut down the forest. After the police abandoned them there, they built a huge fire and slept beside it until morning. Then they began to dig a great hole. They cut down the trees and made a home for themselves in the dugout. They killed bears for food and used the skins for clothing. For several years, these courageous Christians believers had lived very primitively. They had nothing but meat to eat. The children began to grow hair on their bodies like animals. Without medicines, they could only turn to the Lord for healing. When the police returned expecting to find them all dead, they were all stunned at the sight of a thriving village. A few days later, they brought back food and medicine. Eventually, Secretary Brezhnev's wife personally pleaded for their release. Her brother was among the exiled. When the laws were changed and the Christians were brought back home, they faced an unusual challenge. Brother Vizanov told me that he was better off spiritually in the forest. I could praise God freely there, he explained. Here, the body is free, but the spirit is bound. Minutes later, 5 men suddenly rushed into our prayer meeting carrying a man who had been in an accident. He was in a coma, so we quickly anointed him with oil. God healed him instantly. When I returned home, it wasn't long before a new shipment of Bibles arrived at my house. I hid them carefully under the corn because I sensed something bad was going to happen that night. The next day, a car full of policemen came to my house and searched for hours. I could see that God had closed their eyes because they passed right by the Bibles and did not see them. Nevertheless, I was terrified. They checked the house again and again, headed toward the area where the Bibles were stored. Let's forget it, one of them finally said. We've checked everything and we've got nothing to book him on. I felt like shouting for joy, but managed to restrain myself. 3 days later, I was taken by the police and ordered not to have any communication with foreigners or with my own Christian countrymen. If you do, they threatened me, we'll do it the hard way. You'll be in jail and you'll be very, very sorry. When I returned to the house, I knew I was in serious trouble. My family joined me as I fasted and prayed because asking God for protection. In the days that followed, I became more and more conscious of the police following me. Although I continued to transport Bibles and to keep in touch with the missionaries, I felt a new, keen sadness. God had warned me. Grave difficulties lay ahead. That's the end of chapter 5, and I'm going to come back probably in a couple hours and do chapter 6. So I'll just be doing 2 chapters today. God bless you all. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.